So I've been hearing for a long time how the market of, for example, online retail is pretty much a monopoly run by Amazon. Same with Google for search engines, that one's been around for probably 10 years now. And that the Walt Disney Company is becoming a monopoly on entertainment. Now, I agree that these companies do look like monopolies, they're very popular, and that there's a whole new problem outside of monopolies, but by the definition of a monopoly, none of them really are. Amazon, for example, only has a 37% market share in e-commerce, though that's expected to reach 50% by 2021. Disney, which in my experience has been described as the largest of them now thanks to the Fox merger, only has 26% in the entertainment industry. And Google has some contradicting information on their hands here. When you just look it up, it says that they have over 70% of the advertisement market, of the online advertising market. However, the very chart they show for that is not only not the same website as the quote, but it shows Google's share only being 37%, with only one quoted source seeming to say that they have anything more than 40% this year. For this, I'll be assuming their share to be over 70%. So then what does all that have to do with my new antitrust idea? Well, it's to show that while we don't live under more than maybe one monopoly, we do have an oligopoly on our hands, wherein the market is overrun by only a few companies rather than a single one. While this is a better situation than the true monopolies that brought about the antitrust law 100 years ago, times have changed and the goal of antitrust law was to stop the formation of monopolies, but doesn't do much against oligopolies. That's why I decided to think up some new ideas for an antitrust law update. First things first, the biggest problem with antitrust law. It needs to be updated. The current laws haven't been updated in over 100 years, so I'll say that this new antitrust law must be updated with new regulations every 50 years to combat whatever problem is currently being faced. That way, we don't have a new problem every turn of the century. After that, I noticed that one of the biggest factors in the current problem is how much net income these companies report, that being the amount of money after all the expenses that are split between the shareholders. I think if we can limit that and instead force them to divert it, then while it may not directly shrink their size and power, it will force them to spend it. In this case, I'd have 50% of it go to federal taxes, a bracket that is reached when an entity of any kind, company, person, household, whatever, reaches an annual income of over $4 million, with between 1 and 3 million being about 25 to 30%, either one. Another 30% going evenly among all U.S. employees. An example of this effect would take Amazon's net income of $10 billion and divert $5 billion of it to taxes. $3 billion of it would be distributed amongst U.S. employees, and the remaining $2 billion may then be handed out to shareholders, since $2 billion is enough to give to the entire board of directors. The $5 billion annually from Amazon, $15 billion from Google, and another $5 billion from Disney means that federal tax would increase by $25 billion just by increasing the tax rate on 3 companies. And that's not even counting the higher earning companies out there. Apple would net them $29 billion alone. Further on that all U.S. employees thing, I'd imagine that the 30% from all U.S.-based companies reporting over $5 million annually would be sent evenly to all employed U.S. citizens over the age of 18 earning less than $25 an hour. I think that's good. While I can't estimate any number for employees under that system, I don't have the time to add up the net incomes and calculate it. I feel like it's a better use of the money even if each person were to only get $1,000 annually extra, which they probably will since, we're already taking tens of billions of dollars and distributing it to maybe hundreds of millions of people. But by far the biggest problem that people have with this is market share. What I want to do here is limit the market share and increase competition. Competition is always good. I had 2 main ideas when thinking this up, both of which would limit the amount of market share a single company may have. The first would have been linked to how many subsidiaries a company or group of people owned. In short, a company would have no more than 1 over its number of companies times 2. It's kind of weird. Let me explain by an example. If a company has only itself, the base company, that counts as 1 company, and as such, they have nothing more than 1 over 2 or half of the market. If there are 2 companies, then they may have no more than 1 over 4 or 1/4 of the market, so on and so forth. But I quickly realized that this would favor companies that focus solely on a market, on a single market, giving way for duopolies, wherein 2 companies each have about a half of any market. The simplest solution would be to multiply it more, say, I don't know, by 15. Now, a single company with no subsidiaries may only have 1/15th of the market. Two would only be able to have 1/30th of every market. This would make worst case scenario of an oligopoly of 7 companies, 6 of which having 15% of the market share, and 1 having 10. If you still don't like the sound of a 7-company oligopoly, then you can simply increase the multiplier. Another idea, again with the market share, would be to have it scale with the net income of the company. So it'd start at, let's say 1/5 until the company makes over $5 million. Then it multiplies by 2 once the company reaches 10 million. It multiplies the 5 million plus figure by 2. Same for 100 million, 1 billion, 5 billion, 10 billion, 100 billion, so on and so forth. This would make getting even above 100 billion annually, let alone the 50 billion that Apple reports, very difficult. And with that tax bracketing, it becomes nearly impossible to have more than a little market share, meaning that competition is always high, and that does nothing but good. But no matter what system we go by, the company, its employees, and customers, part of any subscription service who have an account, would be divided evenly until the quota is reached, with no board members of the parent company able to buy stock in these new ones. They would split the companies evenly, and nobody would be able to take over multiple companies, so that way it's like the board of directors owns everything, but it's a bunch of different companies, you see. I would imagine that the laws on percentage ownership would also apply to people, where you may not have any considerable control over an amount of companies enough to breach this quota without, the needed amount of stocks being resold to other people. And I think the last thing to consider for these new laws is making sure that officials aren't enticed by the donations of companies in order to reverse any of this. So, one of the easiest ways of doing that is if a company reports than $5 million in net income, then they must, if they donate to a political candidate, donate the same amount to all candidates running for the same position. So whether it's for president, Congress, mayor of a city, whatever, I think that it's pretty unfair that a single candidate can be literally bribed into office. So making any donation from a company that makes $5 million or more in revenue, I don't remember if it was revenue or net income, this is a script, go to all candidates that will help that happen. The real goal of that is to stop them from doing it at all, because imagine a $1,000 donation to every running political candidate. That would be expensive, very quickly. So that's what the real goal is to make them not do it at all. And that's what I've come up with for this antitrust law. I am, of course, no professional on the matter of anything I'm talking about, but I wanted to bring this up as a possible solution for the current situation. And even if this is far from what would actually work, I still think that regular updates to antitrust laws on a regular basis is necessary for them to even work. Because antitrust laws was created solely for the fact that companies were getting too large. So whenever that keeps happening, they have to update the laws. They haven't been updating the laws, in short. You really have to cross a line that's uncrossable nowadays in order to get chased down by antitrust.